Welcome back, everybody. So today in this talk, we want to talk about the sacramental life and the idea of building a Catholic culture in our homes, in our marriages, in our families. And to do that, we want to start by going back to the story of the road to Emmaus, because this is kind of the umbrella story for all the things we want to talk about. Again, I love this story so much, and it in so many ways defines what the Christian life looks like. You have sacramental life, you have discipleship, we have suffering, which are really the three places we want to go in the next three talks. So at the end of the story of the road to Emmaus, when they finally reach Emmaus, when they get to the place to which they were going, remember Jesus was going further, they constrained him, they held on to him, and they're like, no, come and stay with us. And so they went in, and it seems as though Jesus celebrates the Eucharist. It says they sat down at table, and Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. And of course, those are the same exact words that Luke used about a chapter prior to that when he talked about the Last Supper. So Luke is putting us in the sacramental scene. He wants us thinking about the Eucharist. And it's in the process of sitting at table with Jesus, having heard the proclamation of the scriptures, having heard this homily on them, that their eyes then are open when they receive Jesus. And it says he vanishes out of their sight, which is a really fascinating moment. And a lot of scholars have speculated on this. And what it seems to be the reason that he vanishes out of their sight is because now he has taken on sacramental form inside of them. He is with them in a new way now. And that's what brings them to life. That's what opens their eyes. And of course, after this, they have to go back and they have to tell everybody. But it's this very beautiful scene where, again, we go back to this idea that the greatest Bible studies in the world are not enough. The greatest talks, the greatest couple that you could see sitting before you on your screen,
Not us.
our talk is not going to do it. It doesn't actually lead us to having our eyes open. We can be tools in that, and the people in our lives, Bible studies, homilies, video series that you can watch on the internet, all these things can be really great tools. But ultimately, it is the sacramental life that is meant to make sense out of our world. And I love this scene on so many levels because, again, you have this little family, this little husband and wife, and they have this experience together. And there's something that you see a little bit into their hearts. Not only do they have the experience of having their eyes open together, but then they have a little discussion together. They say, hey, do you remember when we were on the road and our hearts were burning within us? And Luke only gives us a tiny bit of this conversation, but I'm sure it was longer than that. And again, they have the whole walk back to Jerusalem where they tell everybody else about what happened to them. And Luke actually says they tell everybody what happened to them in the breaking of the bread. They're telling of the story to everyone around them and their friends and even the priests, the apostles. They're telling the story in the context of the Eucharist because they have a sacramental worldview. It is the sacraments that help make sense out of everything. And I love that as a couple, as a little married family, they're unpacking this together. And I imagine for those 7 miles, they were saying, oh man, and then he said that thing, and I never connected that, and I didn't realize it was him, and all these things were happening. And I love that beauty of that experience of sharing this with someone else, which we're going to come back to in a minute. But what Jesus is showing us through this story is that the Eucharist is the key to unlocking our world, to making sense out of everything. And it's not just the Eucharist. The idea is it's the whole sacramental reality, the whole sacramental life that the church has given us. Our baptisms, of course, the baptism being energized in our confirmations, going to reconciliation, to confession, to actually making our lives right with God, receiving the Eucharist, marriage, holy matrimony in our context, holy orders for others, and then, if we're sick or perhaps at the end of our life, last rites. All of these things are meant to make up the Catholic world, and each of them touch on these very specific parts of one's life. They create an entire lifetime to shape a lens, really, to look at our entire lives, from our birth to our infancy, to our young life, to our teenager life, to our adult life, to our vocational life, to the end of our life. They're meant to frame and to shape everything.
It's so beautiful. The church really gives us such an incredible gift in the rhythms of the year and in the rhythms of our life, saying how these sacraments touch all these different parts of our life and prepare us for different parts of our lives, for what God has for us in that time. And we're going to talk a little bit about that liturgical year rhythm in just a minute. But what I want to talk about first is this concept that is also a gift that the church gave us, and it's in the Catechism. In the very beginning, it really unpacks the story of Genesis when we talk about Adam and Eve. Now, when Adam and Eve were created, God created everything to be in perfect harmony. absolutely perfect harmony. We hear about this, that Adam walked with God in the cool of the day. That's an intimacy I long for, but I can't say I fully even understand what that would be like. I would probably faint first, but it's so beautiful, that intimacy that they tell us that Adam and Eve had this beautiful relationship with our Lord. And then the story starts to break down, right? So we look at how everything was in perfect harmony. And then we have this moment where Eve is approached, and this serpent, we don't know, we think snake because of what we see snakes and serpents as now, but we know that she was approached by this thing known as the serpent, and that serpent was really tricky and really trying to deceive her. And I know this, I think about the evil one is the father of lies. That's what my parents always called him, the father of lies, or the father of half-truths. And I think we see this because she said, they're talking, and the serpent says, can we read this?
Absolutely.
So we're going to read this out of scripture right here. Now, this is in Genesis chapter 3. Now the serpent was the most cunning of all the animals that the Lord had made. The serpent asked the woman, "Did God really tell you not to eat from any of the trees in the garden?" Now I want to stop here, because do you remember what God said? Yeah, that's not what God said. God said, you can eat of all of these trees, except for this one, because this one could hurt you. This one could harm you. You can eat from all of these, but just that one, I ask you to refrain from.
Some of the other translations of Genesis, the other Bibles that we might have other words to describe what Satan is. Some call him cunning or subtle. And I actually like the one that's subtle, because it reminds us that that's how Satan works. He doesn't, convince most people to become Satanists, but he gives us partial truths and twists the truth and twists reality with these subtleties. That's what leads people away from God, which, he's subtle, he's cunning.
Now the woman answered the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden." So she got that part. "It is only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, 'You shall not eat it.'" And here's the part that I love. "Or even touch it, lest you die." God didn't say that.
Not true. Subtle.
Yeah, very,
Twisting
very
of the
subtle.
words.
Just the very presence of the serpent really made her question what God had said.
Well, it makes her start acting like the serpent. She's
Right.
he's doing one thing, and then she starts kind of going along with it, and
Yeah.
she's kind of twisting the words as well.
It's like, oh yeah, God is holding out.
Yeah.
God is holding out on
It
us.
makes her question, maybe this is true.
So the serpent said to the woman, "You certainly will not die. No, God knows well that the moment you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, who knows what is good and what is bad." The woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eyes, and desirable for gaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. And then the eyes of both of them were opened. They realized that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. The story goes on, and we know how that one goes, right? So that moment when the serpent approached Eve and convinced her to eat of that fruit, that's the moment that Catechism tells us was original sin. And how the Catechism puts it is my absolute favorite. They say that moment is when Adam and Eve let their trust in their Creator die. Just think about that for a second. They let their trust in their Creator die. Original sin, and all sin from there on out is the result of our lack of trust in God. And that was a very important moment in Scripture, because it changed everything. Very sadly, it changed everything. And so that perfect harmony that was created with Adam and Eve, we look at it and we see that there was harmony with God. They walked with our Lord. There was harmony with one another. There wasn't any discourse between Adam and Eve. They had this perfect marriage. Imagine, like, God gave you the perfect marriage. It's incredible.
What are you saying about her?
I love you. And then they had harmony within themselves. They weren't desiring that which was wrong. They weren't desiring that which was not what God wanted for them. And then they had harmony with creation. We see this because everything worked in harmony. The beauty of creation, the food that they were able to get from the land, there was no problems with that. We see no problems until after the fall. And so we look at that those 4 harmonies. That's what I want to talk about right now, is these 4 harmonies: harmony with God, harmony with others, harmony within ourselves, and harmony with creation. We see that perfect harmony that God created at the beginning. And then when Adam and Eve let their trust in their Creator die, those 4 harmonies, one by one, started to break down because they severed the relationship, the harmony that they had with God.
Which is the most important.
Which is the most important one. And it's one that makes our relationship with others, ourselves, and creation possible. And the Catechism tells us this, that we were created in these harmonies, and then that sin, it was so devastating, it ruptured the cosmos, causing a rupture in all of the rest of those relationships. So when we look at that, I want us to think, wow, that's pretty heavy. That's really sad that original sin not just ruptured the relationship we have with God and for generations to come. We know this from the Catechism, but it affected our relationship with one another. We see Adam and Eve start to bicker and fight and blame each other. It really ruptures the relationship we have within. All of a sudden, they were like, whoa, I'm naked. I need to grab some leaves. I need to put them around me, make some clothes. And all of a sudden, this beautiful, well, you described this part well.
I take it from St. John Paul II, who talks about how the clothing piece, the fact that they have this need to cover up, suggests that there's something to cover up from, which suggests that they don't trust each other. And there's this moment that, maybe Adam looks at Eve and he's like, oh man, I can look at her in a way that I probably shouldn't be looking at her. That's not necessarily good. And if I can do that to her, she can probably do it back to me. And now I don't trust that she's going to look at me right, so I have to cover up. And so there's this there's something about me that I'm uncomfortable with, but I'm also really distrustful of you because I don't trust you to see me as the human that I am and to see me not as an object. And so everything is falling apart, which reminds us, with what you said a minute ago, the church has always taught really there's no such thing as a purely personal sin. And the idea is that sin has consequences. It ruptures outward. It's like throwing a rock in a pond, right? There's ripples outward. And what original sin is, it's never just about eating the fruit. It's about all the effects that the things that we do, the choices that we make have on our spouses, on our families, on the people around us, our friends, everybody. It all matters.
Yes. And then in that story, we also see what happens with creation, that Adam will toil with the land and work will cause him to sweat on his brow. And I think about that every time I garden because I can't keep a thing alive to save my life. I thought this quarantine was going to be like my year. I'm going to do this. My tomatoes are going to...
Our quarantine garden is not...
We had like 3 tomatoes and maybe 7 cherry tomatoes. But I think about this all the time, like, oh, darn the fall, because maybe otherwise my garden would have been beautiful. I just imagine that Adam just threw an apple, like an apple seed in the ground, and then like, whoop, there was the tree 5 minutes later. Abram is, but a good apple. I mean, I know that's a fruit in the story, but the good apple, not from a fig.
That's what the Jewish tradition says the fruit was actually.
Oh.
Fig, yes.
The bad fruit?
The bad fruit, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because it's the only fruit that can be eaten whole without any parts thrown away.
Oh, okay.
So there's something profound to that, yeah.
But even that, we always think it's an apple, but it just says a fruit. The scriptures just say a fruit. Yeah. Very interesting. All right.
Which is honestly probably a metaphor for something. I mean, the church gives us freedom to say, well, we don't have to necessarily believe it's a big, shiny, red fruit. The sacred author of the text is perhaps using the fruit as a symbol for something else. And again, the Catechism, like you said, makes it very clear. It's not about eating a fruit. That's not what the original sin was. The original sin was that God said, I love you, trust me, I want good for you. And they said, no, we will not trust. We will not serve. We want what you say we cannot have, which is the perennial human problem, right? We still see it today. It's this idea that, well, there's what God says, but that doesn't really match up with what I want and what my desires are, so I will choose otherwise. That's the original sin.
Right. And that's the struggle. And that's the beauty, the sacramental life. It makes it possible for us to start choosing that which God has for us. It makes it possible for us to have the grace to see things with God's eyes. But when we look at the structure of the 4 harmonies and that horrible, we just left you with right now in the story, like everything's trashed, the relationships are all severed, but that's not the world we live in, because the world we live in, it sure does. It sure does feel like the world we live in. But here's the beautiful thing, and this is the good news. is that Jesus came. Jesus came, he became man, and he healed the relationship between God and man so that we could then have a relationship with others, within ourselves, and with creation. So because of Jesus, we can have a relationship with God again in beautiful harmony. And we, every day of our lives, is working towards that restored fullness of harmony. And we can have a relationship with one another that is holy and beautiful, and in the care and compassion and empathy and just beauty that God has for us. We can have a restored relationship, or restored harmony within ourselves. We can have the right relationship. We can desire the right things. We can do the right things that God has for us. And we can have a beautiful relationship with creation. We can have, I mean, I don't know, maybe that will help my gardening down the road, but we can have that relationship.
We can do it. We can garden.
And it's not just about gardening. Of course, we're making a joke about that. But the relationship we have with creation, that harmony, we are called to that again too. And so because of Jesus, because he came, he lived, he died, he rose, because of that, we can have a restored relationship with God, others, ourselves, and creation. Now, here's why I love the Four Harmonies. When I was a young Catholic in college, I would see people, okay, I'm a this kind of Catholic. I'm going to go to daily mass every day, and I go to confession all the time, and I pray all the time. These are so critical. Like that is the foundation of our faith, right? That is really, really important. But when I would do things like mission trips or go to the homeless shelter, they would say, "Oh, Annie, that's like what the liberal Catholics do." And I was like, "Wait, what?" Pretty sure that's what all Catholics do and are called to, because our faith flows out into our works. And so I was talking to a priest friend of mine. I said, "I don't understand this. Why is there this divide? Why are people talking about conservative Catholics or liberal Catholics or Orthodox or not Orthodox? And when we're all Catholic, this is the fullness of our faith." And they explained to me these Four Harmonies. And they said, you know what Satan wants to do, because he's the father of lies and he's the father of half-truths. He also takes on war strategies, because there's a spiritual battle out there. And one of the most common war strategies is divide and conquer. So if our church can be divided from people who think, oh, it's this what it is to be a Catholic, or this is what it means to be a Catholic. And you might even see this in our world today on a political spectrum, right? This is what it is to be a good citizen, which we would always translate into, we are all called to holiness. We're all called to be the people God has called us to be. And if we divide that up, that's a problem, because we're called to this fullness of life. We are called to this beautiful relationship with God, others, ourselves, and creation, no matter what, end of story, period. And I love the thought that Jesus wants all of that for us. He wants our whole lives to be given to him. And when we work with young people, we run this ministry called Camp Waitiva. It's for middle school and high school kids. We take them into the wilderness and we talk about the Four Harmonies, and we do amazing, super fun adventure activities that teach them about what it is to grow in their relationship with God, others, themselves, and creation. I'm not just trying to give a plug for Camp Waitiva here. I am trying to share what we've learned from young people, and that's that sometimes I think we think, oh, okay, you know, we can't ask too much of these kids. They're young, or they have so much going on. So we'll just make sure we get to church on Sunday. We'll just make sure we do the RE classes the year of their sacraments. And I'm not trying to call anyone out here, make anyone feel bad. I think this is common for all of us. But I think what I've learned is that we don't ask too much of our kids. We ask too little. And that kids are so idealistic. They want to go all in. I mean, we see this, right? Like my kids want to go all into TikTok right now. We don't let them go all into TikTok, but they would give all of themselves to these things, to this different music or this different popular thing. They are made at this age to be idealistic and to go all in. And one of the things that I realize is that as people, no matter what age we are meant to go all in. And Jesus wants all of us. He wants all of us. He doesn't want just the part of us on Sunday that goes to church. He wants how we think. He wants who we are, how we act. He wants all of that to be for him. He wants all of that to be in the image and likeness of him, us being those Jesuses out in the world. Our hands and our feet are serving the world in his name and in his way. There's an expression, if God is not Lord of all, he's not Lord at all. And we see this with the Four Harmonies, and we see this when we work with middle school and high school kids, that this just resonates for them. They're like, yeah, like it's so much more than church on Sunday. It's so much more than that one day I received that sacrament. It transforms my whole life, my whole worldview. It's my mom always makes this joke: if you test her blood, it will come out Catholic. Her blood type is Catholic, and that's what the church does for us. In the sacramental life, it changes us. It fundamentally transforms us, and we see the world differently. Our eyes are opened, not in the way that Adam and Eve's were with sin, but our eyes are open to the
way that Mary and
God.
Cleopas' eyes were opened.
Exactly. So it's very, very beautiful, and then we can take that into our everyday lives and into our home lives.
Yeah, and this is so important in the sense that, again, we said that sin is never merely personal. It ripples out. It has an effect, but so does grace, and that's the beauty of this. It's not a zero-sum game. It is all or nothing, as Jesus said, or as Annie said. That's a zero-sum game. That's literally what it means. There's no way to pause. Hold on. And that's such a big.
Hold on, sorry.
And that's so important with what you said earlier. You know, we talked about sin never merely being personal. It always ripples out. It always has an effect. But so does grace. Grace always ripples out, and it affects everything. And this is the whole thing. I mean, fundamentally what original sin was, right, was human beings breaking trust with God. So if sin is human beings breaking trust with God, what's the only way to fix it? Is for trust to be rebuilt, reconciliation to come between human beings and God, but we're too small for that. It's too much for us to actually fix a broken relationship with the divine. So what does God do? God becomes us. He becomes a human being, which is the only way to do it, to fix the brokenness between human beings and God. He does it on our behalf, and he does it as us, but then he does it through everything. And the fact that these four harmonies, like you said, they cover everything. It's our relationship with God, ourselves, other people, creation, matter. And the sacraments actually speak to this, because the sacraments are all spiritual realities housed in matter, right? They are bread, wine, water, oils, the things, you know, human hands, the things of the material world, because God wants to remind us that matter is good. My creation is good. The things that I made are good. I know they were broken, but I have refashioned them. I've reconciled them back to myself, and they are fundamentally good. So every time you receive the Eucharist, yes, it's no longer bread and wine anymore. Now it's the body and blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. But it's how it's veiled in the form of bread and wine to remind us how good those things actually are. Bread, for every civilization on earth, has always represented life. And then the one who is life now becomes bread for us to show us this always mattered. And I'm wrapping everything back into myself. And sometimes, I mean, I think what you're saying is sometimes as Catholics, we just think way too small. We think too small about what our kids can handle. We think too small about ourselves. We think the Christianity that our Catholic faith is, it's me and God. And what do I do about me and God? I go to Mass once in a while. I say some prayers, maybe I go to confession, but it's me and God. Rather than what the church actually says is, it's God and everything. Not even everyone, but everything has been reshaped and repointed back to Jesus Christ because of the resurrection. And that, in a real sense, and I don't know how much they understood in the moment, that's what's happening in the road to Emmaus, is that slowly Cleopas and Mary's eyes are being opened to say, oh. And that's why I'm so fascinated by that 7-mile walk back to Jerusalem. One of the things that I'm reminded of in this, as far as, okay, what do we do about this? How do we live this out? What does this look like in our lives? Well, obviously engaging the sacraments, because we need them. They are what makes everything else make sense. They are what allow our eyes to be open to reality, and these four harmonies being reconciled, and actually allow us to live that. We need the grace, we need the empowerment of the sacraments to actually be holy, to live with one another, to love one another, to give ourselves to one another, both in our marriages and our families and our friends, our coworkers, everyone around us, and to engage in the world, the created world that God gave us. We need the grace of the sacraments, or else that stuff just becomes too difficult. It's inhuman. And so that's why we have divine grace to actually do it. But one of the things I keep thinking about and coming back to, I keep mentioning this walk back of Mary and Cleopas, which we don't have any recording of, but we do know that there was a concept in Judaism that I fell in love with a number of years ago. And it was the concept of the Havarim. Havarim. And Havarim was a Jewish concept, and it was this. Faithful Jews in the time of Jesus said, if you really want to get deeper in the faith, if you want to understand Torah, the scriptures, and understand God's will in the world, you need a Havarim. It's not enough to just have your Bible, have your scriptures, and study them by yourselves in quiet alone. You need a Havarim. And the Havarim was the other person or the group of people that you would get together with, and you would argue about scriptures. You would wrestle with the problems and the questions of the faith. You would debate with each other. You would share each other's hearts and feelings and thoughts, and you would go back and forth. And I'm seeing a little version of that, a little married version of it in the story of the Road to Emmaus, where they're saying, hey, weren't our hearts burning in us? And she was, oh yeah, there was this thing. And that's one of the things that I think we need as human beings to make this stuff make sense. Yeah. In God wanting us to live out a relationship with other people and actually that leading us to holiness, you need a Havarim. And so I encourage you, when you go to Mass, form a little Havarim with your spouse on the drive home or when you're back at home later on, or read, heaven forbid, read the scriptures in advance before you go to Mass. Yeah. I know what our family life is like, and I know what our Sunday mornings are like, so maybe that's not always possible. But if at all possible, I mean, read those readings and talk to your family, talk to your kids in the car after Mass, going having some donuts or whatever it is. Be like, hey, what stuck out to you? What struck you? I didn't understand that word. I didn't know what Jesus was saying here. What do you think he was saying? But to have other people that are like, man, this really moved me, or that really frustrated me, or that thing kind of confused me, to make your family into a Havarim, to make your family, and if you have kids who are really little, teach them, show them, be an example of you and your spouse discussing these things, going over these things, sharing your hearts and your emotions about these things and what to do about them. And that's one of the very practical ways to make this make sense, to not allow it to be enough to just have our eyes opened, but then to go into the world and do something about it.
Yeah, and what I love is that our church gives us such tangible ways of going through each year with scripture, right? Yeah. And it's so understandable as a family to do that too, because for kids, a child being born, that's a very human thing. It's something that they might have experienced with younger brothers or sisters.
They probably experienced it when they were born.
Well, right.
Everybody
they were born too. But we all understand this concept of birth. I mean, Easter gets a little more confusing for like a younger child, or all people probably. But we have this liturgical year that the church is taking us through. So we have Jesus being born, we have the life of Jesus, we have.
And even before that, we have, when does the church, so some of you might know this, some of you might not, but the church actually has its own new year, which is different than the rest of the calendar new year. It's not January 1st. It's actually the first Sunday of Advent. And that's appropriate, so appropriate with what you're saying, because we begin the church's new year in the preparation for the birth of Jesus. Because of course, when Jesus is in the womb, when he's growing as a child, even before his birth, that's when we begin. We start the year with Jesus in the womb. At the Annunciation, we prepare, we have that kind of time of pregnancy. And then Christmas is when the birth finally takes place, but actually started before that. But the church wants us thinking in terms of birth, of new birth, of life.
So you have a date night for New Year's Eve and a date night for the church's New Year. So that's super fun. So that's Saturday before going to date. And so you can, as a couple, and if you have children, as a family, you can have these discussions. And that's one of the other things about just a sacramental life in your marriage and in the Catholic culture in your marriage and in your home is living out the liturgical year. Understanding Advent is a time of preparation, just as much as Lent, really. So it's also a time to think about fasting and almsgiving, and a time to celebrate for the Christmas season, right? Advent be Advent, like Christmas be Christmas. And our children were in catechesis of the Good Shepherd, and they have this beautiful song about the colors of the year. And green, ordinary time, is the growing season. So thinking about, okay, it's ordinary time. This is the growing season. Now we have the seasons of preparation, Advent, Lent. Now we have the seasons of celebration. We have Christmas and Easter, and letting the year carry you through into the life of Christ. And I think on a secular way, our culture does this in the sense we always have a holiday we're looking forward to, right? Like I love Hobby Lobby. It's like that would be like the happiest Saturday morning for me to go to Hobby Lobby. But I always see, and even though they're a Christian company, I always see that push towards the next holiday, right? Like, okay, Halloween is over. Great, it's Christmas, like the day after, and sometimes even before. But you go from Halloween into Christmas. Okay, Christmas is over. Now it's Valentine's Day. So now, okay, Valentine's Day is over. Oh, now it's Easter. Easter's over. 4th of July.
Right.
So, and our culture wants that because we want something to ground us in our year.
But we don't give ourselves any time to actually celebrate it. We don't give ourselves time to actually be in that moment. We've got to hurry on to the next one.
Yeah, right. And that's why the church, Christmas is not just one day. We have the entire octave of Christmas, and then we have the whole season of Christmas, right? And then same thing with Easter. It's not just one day. We have the octave of Easter, and then we have the season of Easter, because the church actually has us celebrating Easter longer than Lent was.
Absolutely.
Which I love that. Like, our sorrows will never be more than our celebrations, because Christ has risen. And he's conquered all.
But we miss that when we don't actually celebrate those seasons.
Yeah.
When Easter is done on that Sunday afternoon, you miss the fact that, oh, actually there's 49 more days of celebration that we're supposed to have.
Yeah.
But we don't do that. It's been said before that the calendar is actually the church's first catechism. That the calendar year is the church's first catechism. So before there was that big fat green book, there was the liturgical year, and we're meant to be catechized to learn who Jesus is and what our faith is by the preparation for these seasons, by the celebrations of these seasons, by the mourning and the penitential moments of these seasons. They're actually meant to teach as much as any catechism is.
Yeah. So one of my my thoughts and our thoughts for you for after this talk and your discussion questions is talk about how can you bring the liturgical year into your home, and how can you have the sacramental life become more alive in your home. I've seen so many beautiful expressions of this. It was Mary's birthday on September 8th. And I saw my friend on Facebook who's out in Ohio. Unfortunately, she moved far away, but she was having a tea party with her girls celebrating Mary's birthday. That's so human. All of us can understand celebrating a birthday, right? One of the traditions we have at Camp Waitiva, which we've also brought into our home, is that confession is a big deal. And it can be scary for kids. It can be scary for adults. It can be a hard thing for all of us. But when you understand the beauty of it and just the pure mercy that is outpoured, and it's not really meant to be a scary thing, but just a beautiful gift given to us by the church, it's worthy of celebrating, really worthy of celebrating, because there's nothing more important than making right our relationship with God. Truly, there's nothing more important. So at Camp Waitiva and now in our home, if we get everyone to confession, we have a big party. And we have root beer floats and we sing songs. It's less of a campfire feel at our home, more of a party. But at camp, it's like it's a huge party around the campfire, and we sing and we share stories of the saints, and we just really celebrate the confession that had happened, the reconciliation that has happened, and the right relationship that has been restored. Because there's nothing more important. Because once our relationship with God is restored, we can work on our relationship with others, within ourselves, and with creation. And then we are living the life God has for us, the fullness of life that he has for us. So that is our challenge for you, or that discussion launching point for you all, rather, for how can you have that sacramental life become more alive in your home, in the reading of the scriptures, in the hovering, and living out the four harmonies we're going to talk about a little bit more in the next talk. But in that liturgical year, how can the liturgical year become more alive in all of our homes and in all of our lives? So we will see you next time.
See you next time.